What do you wonder?
Wow. That's what do I wonder?
What do you wonder?
Well, I think what I wonder is thinking about how Joshua's going to grow up to be the man that we hope that he's going to be.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to mind was what's for dinner. But, I mean...
I wonder why a lot.
I think most of my wonder is so much of it has to do with just, I think, looking at the universe that's just around us.
How things are created?
I guess on a more serious one, like what my purpose is.
Sometimes I wonder if God's real.
I just wonder how much of an impact we can actually make.
I do wonder if my place is right here, right now.
Why are there good and bad things? Why things are a certain way?
Sometimes I wonder how much others really love me.
So what do you wonder? As you walked in the doors today, or as you watch and online, what do you wonder about in your life? You know, I think if you believe in God, one of the things that we wonder about is heaven. And we wonder what heaven's going to be like. We wonder if heaven's going to be adventurous and fun, or is heaven going to be boring? And we wonder what it's going to be like when we're able to see the people that we love and be reunited. We wonder about that. And you know what I wonder about when it comes to heaven? I wonder what it's going to be like to see my mom again. I wonder what it's going to be like to see her face and to hear her words and to wrap my arms around her and to feel her arms wrapped around me again. And I wonder what she's going to look like. I wonder if she's going to be a younger version of my mom, kind of the middle-aged version, or if she's going to be an older version of my mom. That's what I wonder about. And if you're here today and you're not a theist, you don't believe in God, one of the things you wonder, perhaps, is why people would be so naive to believe in such a place called heaven. But come on, isn't it true that even as a non-theist, that you wonder if there's something beyond this life? That you wonder what it's like, perhaps, in the life to come? You see, I think we all wonder. We wonder about important things and big things, and we wonder about small things in our life. We wonder about our relationships, and we wonder about our marriages, and we wonder about our kids if you have kids, and we wonder about our school, and we wonder about our grades, and we wonder about our pets, and we wonder about our favorite sports teams. We all wonder. And what shapes our wonder, as we talked about this last week, what shapes our wonder is this right here. It's this frame of reference. And each one of these glass panes just kind of represent things in all of our lives that we just look through and we wonder what it's like on the other side. And our frame of reference, which every single one of us have a frame of reference, it really shapes so much about the way we see the world. It shapes the way that we see people. It shapes the way that we see our spouse. It shapes the way we see politics. It really determines our behavior, and it determines so much about our belief, and it determines so much about what we hope for. And for every single one of us, we have a frame of reference. And even though our frame of reference may be different, for all of us, our frame of reference is something that we inherited. It's something that is, as little boys and little girls, that we were taught from our mom, from our dad, or from our mom and dad, or maybe from this mother figure or father figure or mentor. They taught us about life, and they taught us how to see life and how to see one another. They taught us, what to pursue, and they really set the foundation on what we wanted to become and what we wanted to pursue. And they actually even taught us how to see ourselves, and when we look into the mirror, what do we actually see? Our frame of reference was inherited. So much of that came as little boys and little girls, and that foundation was established. And not only that, but during our younger years, for a lot of us, this is when faith was introduced. This was when we had a religious experience. And that religious experience for some of you guys was amazing, and it even carries with you today, and it shapes so much of the way you see people and see yourself and see God. And for others, your religious experience was not that great. It was boring. It wasn't that relevant. It was easy to walk away from. But my point is this, is that every single one of us have a frame of reference. And that frame of reference determines so much of how we see the world and how we see things in this world. And our frame of reference was inherited. But then something happens in your life and my life. What happens is that we get older. Years progress. And as years progress and we get older, life happens. And we end up going to school, and we go to high school, we go to college, we go to med school, we go to grad school, we go to law school. And our professors begin to say things and teach us things, and we become aware of information that really question what mom and dad taught us. Or it really begins to question kind of our religious experience. And I'm not so sure about the Bible. I'm not so sure about that religious text because of what I've learned here. And life happens. And it's undeniable that our religious or our educational experience and your educational experience really is a filter for so many things that you see in this world. And not only do we have our educational experience and life happens, but you messed up. I messed up. And with our things in life that we mess up with, we just want to keep it dark. We want to keep it hidden. We just tell ourselves, as long as no one knows, or as long as very few people know what we did, then life's going to be okay. And the problem with this is that this decision that I made, you made, is a permanent part of our story. It's a permanent part of your story. It's a permanent part of mine. And it's what we look back with regret, and we think to ourselves, gosh, I wish I could go back to that moment. I wish I could change those decisions in my life. And for me, where this is, it's just so aware, and I just think about this a lot, is with my 5 sons. They're all getting older, and I'm having more and more conversations with them. And as they're getting older and turning into men, and they've got questions, and they've got questions about God, and questions about life, and questions about relationship, and questions about sex, and all these things. And so we're having these discussions, some of the most important discussions that I have with my boys. And it's amazing to me that these really important discussions are like at places like Pluckers. They just love food. Or places like IHOP, or Whataburger. They're just like, oh, Dad, let's have this important discussion. Let's go get food. And when I have these discussions, and we talk about life, and I say, Sam or Luke or Timbo, you got to trust God with this. God's not trying to hurt you. God's not trying to limit you. God wants you to experience the best. And he's saying, trust me, kiddo, with this. And then inevitably, I get the question that I fear and I don't want to answer. Because they'll look into my eyes, and I'll look into my son's eyes sitting across the table. And these kind of innocent, like sparkling eyes. And they'll say, Dad, did you trust God? Did you cross that line? Did you do that? And so many times I have to look at them and say, son, I did. And I so regret it, and I so wish I could go back and change those decisions in my life. I think we all have those things. And not only do we have those things, but then we have these things. These kind of things that happen in life that are unexpected. These things that happen in life that they just kind of smash our life or kind of break our life. Things like your husband sitting down with you and saying, I don't want to be married any longer. Your wife sitting down with you and saying, hey, I don't want to be married any longer. And it just kind of smashes your world. Or perhaps your boss walking in and saying, you know what, I know you've given your life for this company. I know you've given so many years for this company, and I don't know how to tell you this, but we're going to have to let you go. What do you do now in those moments? Or it's when we get those phone calls that we would never wish on anyone. In fact, this week, I got one of those phone calls. On Monday morning, I was just kind of going about my business, and it was a great morning, and I was with my son Luke at his golf tournament, and I'm on the golf course. And all of a sudden, my phone rings, and I look at my phone, and it's Jordan Geist, our student ministry director here at North Point. And Jordan doesn't call me on Monday mornings. It's his day off. And so I look at this, and I go, well, I got to answer this. And I answer the phone. And Jordan begins the discussion, and he says, Buck, this is not a good phone call. And I don't know how to tell you this, but Miles Hutchinson, one of our students here, has passed away tragically in a car accident this morning. And for me personally, when I got that news, I mean, Miles had a personal place. He had a place in my heart. Miles is so incredibly memorable. And Miles would sit here week after week, and I would look at our students, and Miles would be sitting there, and I'd look at all the students around them, and some of the students had their eyes closed, and I just thought they were praying, you know. I go, man, they're so amazing. They're just praying. Some of them, they were on their phones, and I'm thinking, oh, they're just taking meticulous notes because it's so engaging. But as the majority of the students were doing that, I would look at Miles. And Miles, his eyes would be right here. And he was so unconditional. He was so radiant in the way that he loved and encouraged. And week after week, I would talk to Miles, or when Miles and I would engage, he would say some of the most encouraging things. And conversations with Miles, you just don't forget. And when I got that call, are you kidding me? And I'm not alone. Many of you got that phone call. Many of you got the text or had a conversation with a friend. That life happens. These things happen in life. And not only that, but this also happens. Those things in life that feel like they imprison you. It's our fears or our worries or our insecurities or our anxieties. And they just feel like they trap us. You see, all of us have a frame of reference that we inherited from, mom and dad, or from a kind of father figure, mother figure, and kind of our religious upbringing. But then life happens. And when our experience doesn't add up to the framework we inherited, or think of it this way, when our experience doesn't add up to the version of faith we were raised on, do you know what we do? We wonder. We wonder. God, how in the world could a loving God ever allow that? We begin to wonder and say, my professor talked about the letter of Genesis, and oh my gosh, a whole creation account, and I'm learning all these different things, and what I learned here isn't adding up with here. And so I've got questions, and we begin to wonder. And guys, listen, wonder is a wonderful thing. To wonder and to ask questions and to think logically through things and to have doubt, that's just being human. It's wonderful. But the slippery slope and the danger is that oftentimes when we begin to wander, it leads us to wander, to walk away, to say, you know what, God, I'm done. Christianity, I'm done. And I'm walking away from you. I'm wandering away. And last week, as we began this whole discussion, one of the things I said is we don't have to wander. We really don't. There's something else that we can fix our eyes on. And yes, these are real things in life and real experiences and real emotions. But there's something else that we can fix our eyes on. And we looked at the letter of Hebrews. In the letter of Hebrews, it points us to that very thing. And the letter of Hebrews says this: fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, author, and perfecter of faith. That when Jesus Christ came into the world, that Jesus Christ didn't come on this side of the frame of reference or at some big distance. No, Jesus Christ came into the world to stand shoulder to shoulder on this side of the frame with you. And that Jesus Christ went through hardships. Jesus Christ felt what it felt like to be betrayed. Jesus Christ felt the feelings that you feel, have gone through the experiences that you have gone through, have felt the pressures of this life and the pulls and the tugs and the temptations of the pleasures of this life. He stood shoulder to shoulder. He knows you're not alone. And when Jesus Christ came into the world, he not only did that so he could empathize with you and that you're not alone with whatever's happening, but he also came into the world to forgive you, to live a perfect life, to be a perfect sacrifice, to satisfy the perfect justice of God. He removed the obstacle to your peace with God, which is sin. He paid for it in full. And not only that, but Jesus Christ came into the world to be the center of our frame of reference so that we could keep our eyes on Jesus Christ and we don't have to wonder. So last week, as we talked about that, I wrapped up our time and I asked this question. I said, for those of you who've wandered, for those of you who've walked away from Christianity, walked away from God, my question for you was what was your faith fixed and fastened to that you walked away? Was it fixed and fastened to Jesus Christ or something else? And then I ask another question to those of you who are followers of Christ, for those of you who say, you know what, I'm a follower of Christ, but I've kind of got one foot out of the door, that I'm so tempted to wander, that Christianity feels like it's become apathetic, it's become kind of boring. And I said, if that's you, would you consider this question? What is your faith fixed on and fastened to? That's an important question to ponder and to wonder about. And if you weren't here last week, I so want to encourage you to go online to npaustin.com, and you can catch up because there's so much more that we actually had to say about that. But the reason why I started the way I did this morning, the reason why I gave you kind of a little bit of an extended kind of context to what we talked about last week is because today what we're going to do is simply continue the conversation we started last week. In fact, last week, the message could have been a 70-minute message, but instead I said, let's just break it up over 2 weeks. And last week, we'll talk about 35 minutes. Today, we'll talk about 35 minutes. And it's just one continuous message because this is such an important discussion. And so today, as we continue this discussion, here's what I want you to think about. Just wrap your minds around this. Think about this thought. If we look past Jesus, stop short of Jesus, or take our eyes off Jesus, there is something we will miss. If we begin to say, you know what, this has happened, or this is, questions, or, God, I've asked you 1,000 times, but it doesn't feel like you're showing up, and we begin to remove our eyes off Jesus Christ, guys, there is something we will miss, and I'm telling you, that's something, if we miss it, it will create so much confusion in life. It will create so much confusion about you. It'll create confusion about God, and it will ultimately create confusion about Christianity. So the question becomes, what is that? What is that something that we will miss if we take our eyes off Jesus Christ? Well, in John chapter 14, Jesus actually leans in to this discussion and answers this question. And in John chapter 14, to give you a little bit of context to what's happening, in John 14, this is the end of Jesus' ministry. So this is, just hours away from Jesus being arrested, being crucified, being spit upon, being falsely accused, his flesh being ripped from his body and crucified on a Roman cross. I mean, this is all about to happen. And hours before that, Jesus gets his guys, his closest guys, the 12 disciples in a room, and they're in this room and they're sitting together, and there's Matthew and there's Peter and there's Philip and Thomas and Bartholomew and Thaddeus, and they're all sitting there, and he's looking at the guys. And then he begins to share some things that kind of sink the room. And Jesus says, guys, here's something you need to know. That I'm leaving. Guys, I'm leaving. I'm going away. And where I'm going, you cannot come. But one day you will come. And they look at Jesus and they're like, what? What are you talking? You're leaving Jesus? Our whole existence right now is dependent upon you. Everywhere we go, I mean, we got to be with you. What do you mean you're leaving? Explain yourself. And so they have this conversation. Ultimately, Jesus says, guys, you can't prevent it. I'm leaving. You can't go where I'm going. But one day, you will. And then he looks at the room and he says, and by the way, one of you, you're going to betray me. One of you will betray me. And then he looks at Peter and he says, and Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter hears this, and Peter, he was kind of this passionate, kind of outspoken individual. And Peter looks at Jesus and he says, not a chance. I'll never deny you, Jesus. I'll even die for you. And Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, you're right. You will die for me. And it's not going to be in the greatest of ways. But you will also deny me. And all the guys are sitting there, and they're confused, and they're discouraged, and they're beginning to wonder, Jesus, what? You're going? You're leaving us? What's this all about? And that's the context. And in that very moment, Jesus says these words in John 14:1. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Guys, don't let your hearts be overwhelmed. Don't let your hearts, which represents your emotion and your intellect, don't let your hearts be confused. Don't let your hearts be perplexed. Don't let your hearts feel heavy. Don't let your hearts be overwhelmed. To which, imagine being in that room. Imagine being there with Jesus going like, are you kidding me? Jesus, you said you're leaving us. Jesus, you said Peter's dying in a tragic way. Like, what? Don't be overwhelmed. Why? And Jesus begins to explain the why. And what Jesus says next, I promise you, if you were in the room at this time and you heard what he's about to say as to why we don't have to be overwhelmed or our hearts don't have to be troubled, I mean, when you would hear these words, you would go, Jesus, are you kidding me? These were shocking things Jesus said. And look at what he said. He said, don't let your hearts be troubled. He says, trust in God. Don't you trust in God in essence? Trust also in me. In other words, guys, I'm right here with you. I know what you're feeling. I'm right here with you. To which you know the disciples in the room, they had to be going, are you kidding me? Jesus, did you just say this? Because it's one thing to tell us about God. It's an entirely different thing to claim to be God. Jesus, it's one thing to teach us about God and teach us about life, and we want that. We want you to explain some of these dots and how life works and how we can relate to God and what God thinks of us, and we want that. But to claim equality with God, that's an entirely different thing. Jesus says, guys, you can trust me as you believe in God. Don't you believe in God? Yeah. In the exact same way. Put your trust in me. I'm right here with you. And before they could ask a series of questions about that, he continues and he gives us another perspective as to why our hearts don't have to be troubled. And he says this, he says, plus, think about this, guys. In my Father's house, the word house in the Greek literally means God's dwelling place. It means God's home. It's heaven. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. In other words, Jesus leans in and says, guys, listen, this home, this world, it is temporary. It is not your home. You were designed, you were made for eternity. That is your permanent home. You are not citizens of this world. There is something called heaven. And I am going there to prepare a place for you and you and you and you. And see, sometimes we hear that, and let's just be honest a second. Sometimes we hear, heaven and that, one day we'll spend eternity in heaven and this is just so temporary and it's so short, and then our real life kind of, begins in heaven. We hear that and we go, that sounds like magic. It sounds like fairy tale. That sounds like something you would just make up. In fact, that sounds like what religious people make up in really difficult times of life to make people have hope, to give people comfort, to make people feel good. But guys, come on. Listen, I don't and we don't believe in heaven to make people feel good. I don't and we don't believe in heaven to say at very difficult times of life to give people hope. That's not why I believe in heaven. I believe in heaven because Jesus Christ said it's real. It's a real place. And he's going there to prepare a room for you. Eternal life. And I would just think, because it comes from the lips of Jesus Christ, that we should do everything we can to discover more and more about heaven. Like, what is heaven really like? Is it adventurous? Is it a wild place? Is it life-giving? What's heaven like? And what's so good is that the Bible is full of scriptures that detail heaven, that give you insight in what heaven will be like. It's fascinating. And I think one of the greatest things we could possibly do is to discover more and more and more about our home, about heaven. In other words, just think about it this way. For my beautiful wife and I, Jill and I, our 20th wedding anniversary is coming up in January 23rd. So we're, about a month away. And here's actually a picture of my wife and I, Jill and I. We got married here in Austin, and this is at River Place Golf Course, and Jill loved golf, and I love golf, big part of our lives. So it's really cool getting married on a golf course. I love that memory. And that was about 20 years ago. So in January, we're going to celebrate our anniversary. And we've been talking about that. And we're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Jill's like, man, I love the beach. And I'm like, I kind of love the beach, but so we'll go to the beach. And so, it's kind of how it works. And so, over the last few weeks, I've been looking, beaches, beach vacations on a budget, like your top destinations on a, budget. And so we're thinking about that. And as we're thinking about these different kind of resorts and different places we could go, one of the things we're doing is we're looking on this thing called TripAdvisor. You guys ever seen that? Use that tool? It's amazing. And so we're on this, and what's so cool is like you can pull up the resort, and it'll tell you every little detail about that place. I mean, it'll tell you about the food and if it's too salty or not salty enough. It'll tell you about the pools and are they too warm or do they have a heater? This time of the year we need to think about that. It'll tell you about, the best restaurants. It'll tell you about, the beach. Does it have seaweed? It'll tell you every little detail. And so we've been looking. It's been awesome. And as a result of kind of knowing all those details, Jill and I, we're excited for that trip. We're looking forward to it. In fact, we're even preparing for it. And one of the things I'm doing to prepare for this trip is I told Jill about a month ago, I said, babe, I need to get skinny for that trip. And so I've been cutting out carbs, and any of you guys who've cut out carbs, you know exactly what I'm perhaps going through. Like every time I see Twizzlers, those licorice, I'm like, I want that. I need that. And every time I think about Bluebell, it's just, I've got that craving. I want Mr. Gaddy's pizza with some ranch on it. I want a Dr. Pepper. I want all that all the time. It's happening right now, like seriously. But the reason I'm doing that is because we're just so excited. Like we're so looking for that, towards that, and it motivates us. Guys, the reason I share that is because in the exact same way, we can do that with heaven. In fact, one of the most comprehensive resources I've ever come across in terms of the details and what heaven's like and all the different questions is this book by a gentleman by the name of Randy Alcorn. It's kind of like TripAdvisor for heaven. I know that's kind of weird and don't go too far with that, but it really is. It's like all those things you're like, what is that? And will I? And what's the experience going to be like? And is it harps and halos? It is unbelievable. And it's a great resource. And it helps us to prepare for what to expect. It helps us prepare to make decisions today to be home where God designed us to be. And in fact, the more we learn about heaven, it changes the definition of wonder. See, the initial definition, the main definition of wonder is desire or to be curious to know something. But when you learn about heaven, when you discover what Jesus, not what I said, not what religious people make up, from the lips of Jesus Christ, when you discover about heaven, it changes the definition to this, to feel admiration and amazement, marvel. Wow. God, you are so good. Wow. And Jesus says, guys, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in me in the exact same way as you trust in God. And guys, this is temporary. This is temporary because eternity is heaven. And then he continues and he says these words. Guys, you know the way to the place where I'm going, looking at the disciples and the guys in the room. And Thomas in the room, he hears Jesus say this, and he's, Thomas the analytical one, Thomas the engineer, Thomas the one who, dots all the I, crosses the T's. That's Thomas. Thomas like, Jesus, quick, I have a question. Jesus, I'm not sure I'm exactly following you. And Thomas said these words. Thomas responds and said, Lord, we don't know where you're going. So how can we know the way? Just my question, Jesus. And what Jesus says next here is a very popular verse. And the church has used this verse for far too long out of its context. The church has used the very words of Jesus Christ way out of its context to be an exclusive thing to say, hey, everybody, you don't get into heaven. And they've just pulled it out of its context. Today, maybe for the first time in your life, I want to show you what Jesus said in its context because it is not exclusive, it is inclusive. And Jesus responds to Thomas and the guys and he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In other words, guys, this idea of how do I have peace with God, how do I get into heaven, it's not this big kind of pluralistic, subjective, ooey gooey, like who knows, who can ever figure it out. Jesus says, no, I came here. And I came into this world to stand shoulder to shoulder with you to make it clear and simple that everyone is invited, regardless of what you have done. regardless of what you have or have not done, that I have come into the world to once and for all make it simple, that everyone is invited and everyone gets in the exact same way. It's simple. And then he says these words. He continues and he says, guys, if you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him. You do know God and have seen him. And then Philip listening to this is like, okay, there's so much information in this and so many things you're saying here, Jesus, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this. And John in the room, John's writing all these notes down because he wrote this letter. I mean, all the guys. So Philip finally asks the question. And he says, okay, here's what would clear up the confusion. He says these words, Lord, Jesus, show us the Father. Just show us God. And that will be enough for us. If we can just see God, then we can trust that all these things and all these hardships and all these difficulties, that God is actually working for the good of those who love him, that God is the grand weaver, taking all the threads of life, the good ones and the bad ones, and he's weaving it all into something that's going to make sense, that we're all going to stand before him and go, oh, that's why. If you just show us God, Jesus, that will be enough, and we'll trust you. And I love Jesus' response. He says, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I've been among you such a long time? Philip, have you taken your eyes off me? Philip, have you focused over here? Put your eyes over here? Jesus, or Philip, don't you know me? Don't you know I'm right here with you? And then Jesus ends the passage and he says, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. I'm God. Look right here. Jesus says, I'm right here with you. See, 2,000 years ago, the angel appeared to Joseph and said, and his name will be called Emmanuel, God with us. And if you've ever been curious about God, how does God see me? What would God say? What would God do? Just look at the life of Jesus Christ. What would God do if I messed up and, man, I've got something in my past. I messed up big. How does God view that? Well, what did Jesus do with the woman caught in adultery? And all the religious people around and all the shame that was exposed. Remember? He said, hey, kiddo, I don't condemn you. I don't condemn you. Full of grace, mercy, unconditional love. But not only full of grace, but full of truth. He says, now, go leave your life a sin. It's hurting you. It's making life so much more complex. If we have questions about who would God lean in the direction of? Would God lean in the direction of kind of the religious people, the people who kind of have it all together, the people who aren't very religious? I wonder what God would think about that. I mean, just look at the life of Jesus. Where did Jesus spend the majority of his time, resources, and energy focused on? Not on the people who were there, on the people who weren't there. The tax collectors, the prostitutes, the sinners of the day. That God leans in their direction. Wow. Jesus says, guys, I'm right here with you. That brings us back to our initial question, which Jesus' point in this passage is this. If you look past me, stop short of me, take your eye off me, you may miss the Father. If you take your eye off me and put it over here, put it over here, put it over here, you will miss the Father. And that will lead to confusion in your life about God, about how he relates to you, about what's happening in life. Keep your eyes, Jesus would say, right here. So, let me just ask you those questions again. Think about it in this context now. If you have wandered and wandered away from God and wandered away from Christianity, what was your faith fixed on? and fastened to? Was it fixed on Jesus Christ or perhaps something or someone else? Or if you're here today and you're a follower of Christ and again, you've kind of got one foot out of the door and you're like, oh, I'm about to just walk away from the whole thing because of all these circumstances and all these events. What is your faith fixed on and fastened to? Is it something other than Jesus Christ? Is your faith fixed on, or your eyes fixed on the church? Because, we're never told to fix our eyes on the church. Are your eyes fixed on the Old Testament? It's the God of the Old Testament. The reason I walked away from the whole thing and God and Christianity, the whole thing is because, have you read the Old Testament? When Jesus came into the world, he kind of landed the plane to the Old Testament and everybody got off. And Jesus' words were, guys, I have come into the world to introduce something brand new. Keep your eyes. Brand new. Keep your eyes on me. Have you fixed your eyes on a version of faith that says bad things don't happen to good people? Have you fixed your eyes on that? Because I think Jesus would kind of look at us, maybe even with a little smile, and go, where'd you learn that? Who told you that? Because look at my life. Jesus is the pinnacle of good. He is the perfecter of our faith. He doesn't get any better than Jesus, yet he was crucified on a Roman cross. And plus, have you lost sight of Jesus' words? Where he says, guys, in this world, this is not your home. We are just passing by. It's a very short time. Our home is in heaven. I go to prepare a place for you. In this world, Jesus says, you will face trouble. In this world, you will face hardships. You will have questions. You will have difficulties. But you can keep your eyes on me. The bottom line is that 2,000 years ago, a person who's the light of the world came into the world. That God sent Jesus to stand with us so we wouldn't wonder where we stood with him. You never, ever, ever have to wonder about that. Let me pray for us. God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this moment, for this reminder that we are not alone. That you understand and can empathize our thoughts with our questions, with our doubts. You know, we're not alone. And Father, thank you for the promise of eternal life through Christ, that it's simple, and that you, even in this moment, have prepared a place for us. And we don't have hope because we just desire hope. We have hope because of the words of Jesus Christ. It's real. God, thank you for this day. Would you just meet us in our thoughts and our wonders? And would you keep our eyes focused on you? In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week for part 3.